This is my favourite scene from my favourite film ever made, Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. The scene shows the protagonist of the latter half of the film, Dave Bowman, disconnecting Hal, the ship's artificial intelligence, after Hal has killed Bowman's crewmate, Frank Poole, and the rest of the crew in hibernation. The scene is breathtaking not just for the context in the story, but it's also one of many examples of Kubrick's use of each fundamental element of filmmaking to create an engaging atmosphere. The cinematography is all over the place, yet it's also precisely placed, emphasizing the disorientation one feels in space as there is no true up or down. The main actor gives a very restricted performance, perfectly communicating the stress David feels while he also tries to hide and overcome his emotions in order to successfully disconnect Hal. The sound design is perfectly crafted. The music, or lack thereof, allows us to focus on Dave's intense breathing and Hal's disorienting voice as he eventually dies. And finally, there's Hal. As Dave gradually erases his memory before disconnecting him, Hal tells Dave,
I'm afraid, Dave.
and
My mind is going. I can feel it.
this, like many other scenes in the film, raises many questions, such as, is Hal truly a sentient robot, or is this part of his programming? Does Hal truly feel fear, or is he trying to play to Dave's compassion? It also forces us to ask why Hal wanted to kill them. Was it for self-preservation, or pure dedication to the mission? The film hints at all these possibilities, but doesn't ever stop to spoon-feed you the answers, instead letting the viewers come to their own conclusions. This is one of the many reasons 2001 is so intriguing as a film, and one of the many reasons why I greatly dislike its sequel, 2010. For those who are unaware, 2001's screenplay was written by both Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, and during the production of the film, Arthur C. Clarke wrote his own novelized version of the film, and later 3 sequels. The first of those sequels was 2010, which this film is primarily based on. The film was directed by Peter Hyams, who at the time was a well-known voice in the science fiction genre, responsible for films like Capricorn 1 and Outland. He took on the project after seeking Kubrick's blessing, to which he provided, and gave us a film more aligned with Arthur C. Clarke's novel than Kubrick's film. Recently, the film has seen a small resurgence, being regarded as the forgotten sequel, or the underrated sequel. Personally, I highly disagree with the latter title. When I first heard about it, I didn't understand why a sequel to the film would even be attempted, and when I did see it, I was incredibly disappointed. Mostly with how the film completely strayed away from Kubrick's original film, that it seemed to me like the only thing that kept it up was the fact that it had 2010 in the title, and some sets were recreated from 2001. That's what I want to explore here. Why I personally feel that Hyams' film isn't a worthy sequel to Kubrick's film in any possible way. You may say that it's unfair to compare 2010 with its predecessor, given that it's more concerned with staying true to the book rather than being a sequel to 2001, and on some level you're right. However, in my opinion, it's incredibly difficult to view it on its own when the film constantly reminds you of 2001, whether it be intentionally or purely incidentally. Furthermore, my criticism of the film lies less with how the storytelling makes sense within the context of the universe, although that's something I can certainly do.
What are you talking about? I didn't authorize anyone to tell Hal about the monolith.
And which for security reasons of the highest importance has been known on board during the mission only by your HAL 9000 computer.
Oh, sons of bitches. I didn't know. I didn't know.
But my criticism lies more in how the technical aspects result in a film that feels like it doesn't even fit within the same story. From the very beginning, there's a clear difference in the presentation of these two films. In fact, I think the intro credits for each film perfectly demonstrate how each film differs in their approach to the story. Both films have similar ideas for their intro credits, which is opening to an image to Also sprach Zarathustra by Richard Strauss, but their differing approaches convey completely different ideas. 2001 opens on a beautiful visual of the sun, earth, and moon in alignment. It perfectly encapsulates the grandiosity that the film seeks to convey throughout, and is even referenced visually later. It also establishes a visual motif of circles in the film, representing the circle of life, death, and rebirth. 2010 opens to a visual of satellite dishes on Earth. I'm not sure what they're trying to convey, perhaps it's establishing a more earthbound and human story, but either way, it's nowhere near as exciting as 2001's image. In addition, 2001's only credits in the sequence establish the studio, a Stanley Kubrick production, and the title, clearly wanting to keep the attention and emphasis on the music and visuals, while 2010's opening credits cram the titles, the cast, the crew, etc. into the scenery, breaking the immersion. It's also worth noting that while the music is the same, they are played completely differently. 2001's film has a lot more build-up to it, and when it comes in, it plays slow. It conveys an epic atmosphere to match the visuals. But 2010's lacks build-up, and has a notable lack of texture compared to 2001. ...2001 clearly has a larger orchestral arrangement, whereas it seems like 2010 has the bare minimum orchestral instruments to get by. And it's clear 2010 wanted to establish a much quicker tone than 2001 did, which, in my opinion, sacrifices any immersion or interest in the story. Something else that's worth taking into account is how Alsosprach is used throughout the rest of the film. 2001 incorporates it twice again, when Moonwatcher smashes the bones, and when the Star Child reaches Earth. This is because the film uses the composition as an establishment of the most significant evolutionary shifts in humanity, when ape becomes man, and when man becomes something more. 2010 doesn't reuse the composition until the very end during the credits. The weight and power once held by the score is completely lost and now just amounts to a credits song. This is one small demonstration of how each element of filmmaking makes these films differ drastically, but what sets them apart even more are the two vastly different directing styles by each director. 2001 had Stanley Kubrick, a director easily identified by many sorts of aspects that we'll get into later, but the most notable aspect is his portrayal of big themes that force us as an audience to participate in deep introspection. Furthermore, he is a director that relies on visual storytelling, letting the scenery draw us in and spares exposition as much as he can, only relenting when necessary. Peter Hyams is the exact opposite. He is a director familiar with the sci-fi genre, however his storytelling is very much expository. He does have his moments where he tries to leave the visuals to communicate with the audience, however most of those scenes are drowned out by expository voiceovers. Take this scene for example. The crew have just boarded the Discovery and are sending Dr. Chandra to fix Hal. We can already understand what is going on in the scene, and the voiceover just feels redundant, reminding us of what is happening and what was happening only minutes before.
Discovery has been partially revived. We don't know how much damage has been done or if we'll be able to bring it back home. Most of that is up to Hal. It's time to unleash Chandra. We'll see if our computer brain surgeon and psychiatrist can put Hal back together again.
The rest of the voiceover is just more exposition that doesn't matter, like Floyd thinking that the monolith knows the astronauts are near, and that he is uncertain if Hal is malfunctioning or if he's crazy. Kubrick does occasionally dabble with voiceover, but he very carefully articulates when voiceovers should be applied, and generally only uses them to explain the inner thoughts of his protagonists. However, he understood that for this story, the emphasis should not be on the characters, but on the ideas and themes of the film. Each director's camera work further emphasizes this stark difference in their intent. Kubrick's camera work is very objective, forcing the audience to observe rather than participate, as if we are the extraterrestrials observing humanity. You can see this in the documentary-like cinematography of the Dawn of Man sequence. Notice how the camera is always placed far away from the subjects, but always zoomed in. This creates a subconscious feeling that while they may seem close to us, and in many instances right in front of us, there is always a great distance between the characters and the audience. You can find this in most shots during the film, again, subtly distancing us from the characters. This strive for objectivity also shows itself in the space scenes. Almost every shot in the Discovery or in space is shot at a strange angle, as opposed to constantly shooting straight on the actors. This further emphasizes the environment of space, that there is no true up or down in space. For all we know, they could be upside down, right side up, or even sideways. On the other hand, in 2010, Peter Hyams is much more subjective in his framing. Each shot on board the ships are straight and head-on, as he tries to establish the audience to be on the same level as the crew, actively participating in the journey. This is the same even when the crew is actively in outer space. When you compare the spacewalk scenes in both movies, Hyams still keeps the camera straight and upright with the characters, again trying to make sure the audience stays connected to the characters on the screen. At this point, it becomes a question of whether objectivity is better than subjectivity, and the answer to that question is very much a subjective one in of itself. However, I personally feel that Kubrick's objective lens fits better with the story than Peter Hyams' subjective filter, as I think Kubrick better immerses us into the unknown and forces us to try to understand the film on a deeper level. Finally, this brings me to how each director utilizes the music in each respective film. The music of 2001 is one of the most well-known aspects. The use of a classical score to complement the visuals of space and space travel is definitely unconventional and fits incredibly well. Kubrick at first commissioned for an original score to be produced, but after apparently not liking it, he instead chose to incorporate classical music throughout. The reason it works so well is because it has a very timeless feel to it. The Also sprach Zarathustra has a clear grandiosity in the composition. The Blue Danube Waltz acts as an audible representation of the synchronization and dance of the universe. The Requiem acts as a powerful motif for the monolith, emphasizing its otherworldly nature, and so much more. For 2010, Hyams opted for an original score, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for me the compositions are incredibly simplistic and do very little to differentiate themselves with the piles of 80s sci-fi soundtracks. Moreover, 2001 knows when not to use its soundtrack. In the Dawn of Man sequence, the music is spared so all of our attention is on the apes, only using the music to add to the gravity and importance of Moonwatcher learning to use the bone as a tool. In the spacewalk scenes, there's no music whatsoever, with the only audible thing being the breathing of the characters, again emphasizing the vast emptiness of space. You get the picture, whereas in 2010, the music is used very, very often. Let's see what it would look like without the music and with Kubrick's breathing sounds. Again, this is very much a subjective thing, but I much prefer it with Kubrick's breathing as it much better fits in with how it was established in 2001. Now, I can't stress this enough, I am in no way saying that 2010 should have been a carbon copy of 2001. What I am saying is that the film should have been done in a way that the different aspects are kept consistent, to make the films feel as though they belong together. A good example of this, in my opinion, is Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. It may seem like a strange comparison, but just hear me out. Like 2001, Blade Runner is a classic sci-fi film that helped define the genre, and like 2010, Blade Runner 2049 is a legacy sequel released years after the first, with a new director. Blade Runner had Ridley Scott, whereas Blade Runner 2049 had Denis Villeneuve, two very different directors. However, Villeneuve was still able to craft a story and a film that feels as though it fits in perfectly with Scott's Blade Runner, while also very clearly displaying its own voice and style. You have Roger Deakins' absolutely jaw-dropping cinematography, on par with Jordan Cronenweth's gritty, film noirish atmosphere. You have both films trying to explore similar themes, be it loneliness, memories, corporate greed, romance with technology, and both films strive to ask the question of what makes us truly human. all the while doing this with their own voices. So how should 2010 have been done instead?
I don't know. It's bizarre.
I believe 2010 could have worked with Peter Hyams at the helm if he had chosen to stick closer to a vision suited with 2001, but it probably would have been better under a different director, more similar to Kubrick. If not that, then I believe Peter Hyams should have done a film closer to his vision, but with much more to differentiate from 2001. Because again, the film relies a lot on the audience already having watched 2001, and it's well known that Kubrick had all the sets and props destroyed. Perhaps a new vision of the Discovery and the future should have been created specifically for 2010. But what do you think?